film kicked off with Young Bok, a quiet and stoic girl, standing alone. She was waiting for a soldier who was coming back from the front with a massive canvas bag full of uniforms that needed to be mended. When she got to the workshop, she went to her station and got right to work. Young Bok was a total pro at her job. Her hands were a blur as she worked, stitching perfect seams at a pace that put everyone else to shame. Her work was meticulous, and she was way faster than the other seamstresses. But one of her co-workers, Kyung-ja, was feeling a certain kind of way about her. Kyung-ja said that Young Bok was probably just living her best life, since both her in-laws had passed away. After all, with her husband's whereabouts unknown, she was probably set to inherit a whole pile of cash. Kyung-ja kept talking trash, calling Young Bok moody, and saying she never cracked a smile. Her rant only stopped when the head of the workshop told her to shut her trap. It was here that we started to get the lowdown on Young Bok's tragic backstory. Back in the day, during the Japanese occupation, her brother had been conscripted as a forced laborer, and Young Bok herself was almost sent off to become a comfort woman. To save her from that horrifying fate, her parents had gotten her married off when she was just 14 years old. It was a rushed affair, and she had never even met her husband. When they tied the knot, he was still studying in Japan. After that, he just vanished off the face of the earth, and she never heard from him again. After the liberation of Korea, her parents and her in-laws passed away, one after another. Young Bok had to handle all the funerals by herself, and she was now completely on her own. Her one and only hope was to reunite with her husband, the one person she had never met but had been waiting for 5 long years. This was the real reason she never smiled. It wasn't because she was moody or bitter. It was because she had been weighed down by the kind of grief that was impossible to share. After all those years of living in a state of purgatory, Young Bok looked at an old photo of her long-lost husband. She had no idea what the guy looked like in real life. But that night, destiny dealt her a crushing blow. She was in a state of total shock when she saw her husband, Seo Rim, return home with a Japanese woman, Sachiko, who was very much pregnant. The humiliation and pain of it all were a whole vibe. Without saying a word, she started to clean up Seo Rim's room, pretending to be busy as if everything was totally normal to cover her crushed heart. But she couldn't hold back. A single, short phrase slipped from her lips. She accidentally called him her husband. It was enough to freeze the whole room. It turned out that Seo Rim already knew all about their marriage, but this was a bad sign. Instead of embracing her, he told Young Bok that he couldn't accept their arranged marriage. He had no intention of keeping her around and told her to get ready to leave the house. Young Bok just couldn't handle the crushing weight of that rejection. She looked him right in the eye, and with a voice full of cold contempt, she poured every single drop of her heart, flooding the thick atmosphere, choking Seo Rim with all her misery. She had been in that house for years, maintaining it from crumbling down into dust, while keeping both her parents and Seo Rim's, until they kicked the bucket. No matter what, she had the right as the owner of the house and wouldn't accept being kicked away of there.
저게 무슨 소리야?
The next morning, Young Bok made a beeline for her husband's room and, without a word, motioned for his new wife to follow her. This was Sachiko, a petite woman with a delicate air about her. She was a total fish out of water. Young Bok took her to the fields to get right to it. The work was no joke, picking chili peppers in the scorching sun. Young Bok was quiet as usual, but the other women in the field were all over it. Kyung-ja, who had been talking trash about Young Bok just yesterday, was suddenly on her side. She complained that Seo Rim was a real piece of work for leaving his legal wife and then showing up with a whole other woman. Kyung-ja knew the fight was a lost cause and that Young Bok would never be able to stand up to the Japanese woman. All of a sudden, Sachiko let out a blood-curdling scream and started shouting in Japanese. Turns out a bug had landed on her hand, and she was having a complete meltdown. But then, Young Bok splashed her with water and told her to speak Korean, knowing the Japanese woman also knew how to do it. After a long day of picking, Young Bok headed over to see a cloth dealer, the guy who owned a workshop. She wanted to get some extra sewing work to make some more money, but the man was a total buzzkill. He told her he wasn't going to give her any money, claiming all the money she made would just end up in that Japanese woman's hands. Later, as they walked home, as she was counting the meager pay she had earned, Young Bok remembered what the cloth dealer had said. The words hit her like a ton of bricks. All her hard work, all her pain, would end up for her. Young Bok exploded. All of her pent-up frustration and rage came bubbling to the surface. She let it all out, screaming that all Japanese people were the same. She told Sachiko they had ruined her life and had taken her brother, almost taken her, and now had taken her husband. She didn't care. To her, every single one of them was a scumbag. Sachiko, feeling hurt by the words, ran to Seorim and started crying, telling him that Youngbok had insulted her. Just then, a cold silence fell over the house. Suddenly, Youngbok appeared, holding a tray with food. She had prepared a separate small table for herself and Sachiko, so nobody ate on the same table as Seorim, but Sachiko saw the separate tables, picked her rice bowl up, and moved it to eat on the same table as her husband. She looked at Youngbok, her gaze cold, as if Youngbok was no more than a ghost to her in Seorim. Youngbok didn't accept that. She took Sachiko's bowl back to their table and insisted no one ate at the same table as Seorim. That night, Youngbok decided to sleep outside. She figured it was the best way to get some space since the house only had 2 rooms, one for Seorim and Sachiko, while the other one was right next to their room. She didn't want to hear anything as they spent their night. After a while, Seorim appeared and felt bad for Youngbok, telling her to sleep inside. But Youngbok was stubborn. She told him there was no way she was sharing a roof with Sachiko. Seorim tried to persuade her, but Youngbok stayed totally stone-faced, not cracking a single smile. He tried to get Youngbok inside by pulling her, but they ended up falling, and Seorim was right above Youngbok. When Seorim finally saw how beautiful his wife was, he was suddenly hit with a wave of guilt. He apologized, admitting that he had never once thanked her for taking care of his parents. He said he finally accepted her as his wife and promised to change. He wanted them to start their lives together, for real this time. Hearing him say all of that made Youngbok get all flustered, and a vague smile crept onto her face. The next morning, Youngbok confided in Kyungja. She told her that her heart was beating out of her chest the night before. Kyungja responded that it was a clear sign she had fallen in love. Meanwhile, Sachiko was standing right there, hanging up laundry, and she clearly heard the entire conversation. That afternoon, Youngbok was so caught up in her thoughts that she didn't even notice it was raining. She finally went to take down the laundry and saw Seorim's shoes. She immediately started scrubbing them clean. Then she took Sachiko's shoes and let them soak in the rain. The rivalry between the 2 women was getting pretty intense. Seorim tried to cool things off by teaching both of them to read and write in Korean, but they both just gave him a hard pass. Youngbok said she was too swamped with work, while Sachiko retorted that if someone as illiterate as Youngbok could get by, she could too. Hearing that made Youngbok's blood boil. The tension between them went from bad to worse. But as soon as Sachiko saw her husband trying to hide a laugh, she tried to break the tension. She proudly explained the meaning of her name, then took the first syllable of her name and the first syllable of Youngbok's name to create the name Hengbok, which means happiness. It was her way of saying they should try to get along. That night, Youngbok couldn't get any sleep. She heard Seorim coughing uncontrollably. She immediately got up and told him he needed to drink something. Just then, Sachiko came out, pulled out a handkerchief, and started rubbing his back. Youngbok felt totally useless and a little bit jealous, but that jealousy vanished in an instant when she saw something on the handkerchief. It was blood. It was a crushing blow, and the look on her face showed she was instantly transported back to her past trauma. In the next scene, Youngbok was seen sobbing while washing her husband's blood-stained clothes. Sachiko came out and told her to stop. She calmly said that bloodstains were a lost cause and that she had tried to get them out many times without any luck. Youngbok snapped back, screaming that Sachiko was an idiot who didn't know the right way to do things. She was in a state of sheer delusion, convinced that she could get the stains out and somehow magically make her husband healthy again. Youngbok had no idea that Seorim was standing right behind her. He simply told her that he hoped he could be back to his old self, the person he was 6 years ago. He then told her a story that hit her like a ton of bricks. He confessed that 6 years ago, he was imprisoned in Tokyo for being a part of a book club that studied the Korean language. It was there that he contracted tuberculosis. After the country's liberation, he was finally freed and returned home. But now he was on his deathbed. The next morning, as Sachiko was hanging up her husband's clothes, a wave of rage came over Youngbok. She walked straight up to Sachiko and slapped her across the face. Youngbok was absolutely furious, blaming the Japanese people for infecting her husband. She screamed that Sachiko was nothing more than a cursed concubine and spewed insults at all Japanese people. Sachiko quickly fought back, denying that she was a concubine. But then her tone shifted. She told Youngbok that she understood exactly how she felt. She too had felt moments of sheer bitterness, feelings that almost made her do something horrible. She explained that they were both in the same boat, fighting for the same man and doing whatever it took to keep from being all alone. When Young-bok heard that, she went completely silent. Young-bok was so consumed with guilt for being so cruel to Sachiko. Suddenly, she heard Seo-rim calling her from outside. It turned out he just bought her a bicycle and said she had to learn how to ride one. That evening, Young-bok realized Sachiko wasn't home, filled with a sense of dread. Sachiko hadn't returned. Young-bok ran out of the house, calling out her name. She eventually found Sachiko at the river, where she had slipped and injured herself. She was on the ground and couldn't walk. Despite the terrible fight they just had, Young-bok's first instinct was to help her. She was worried about Sachiko and the baby. Sachiko noticed the look of concern on Young-bok's face and took her hand, placing it on her swollen stomach. She reassured her that the baby was totally fine and that it kicked all the time. For the first time in 5 long years, a genuine smile spread across Young-bok's face. They ended up getting into another fight, but this time, it was different. This fight was the start of their unexpected friendship. Young-bok helped her up and then put her shoes back on for her, a gesture that spoke louder than any words. On the walk back home, Sachiko noticed the ring Young-bok always wore. She asked about it, and Young-bok explained that it was a family heirloom from her mother. It reminded her of all the good times she had with her family. Hearing that, Sachiko opened up and told Young-bok that she was actually an orphan who was raised in an orphanage. It was a total game changer. Young-bok was shocked, asking why Sachiko hadn't said anything sooner since they had so much in common.
나 다리 아파.
That night at dinner, Young-bok started to show her newfound affection for Sachiko. She poured her some tea, gave her a brand new pair of shoes, and promised to take care of her until the baby was born. Seeing them finally get along made Seo-rim feel a sense of pure joy. The next morning, Young-bok headed over to the head seamstress to ask for some seaweed. Luckily, the head seamstress had some leftovers. She handed it over and asked when Sachiko's baby was due. Young-bok said it would probably be this month, and the head seamstress praised her for being so caring. But she also gave Young-bok some advice, telling her not to get so caught up in taking care of Sachiko that she forgot to take care of herself. Back at the house, Young-bok started sewing baby clothes for Sachiko. Her actions were a clear sign that she truly cared. Just then, Seo-rim walked into the room to grab a book. Young-bok wanted to say something, but the words were stuck in her throat. As Seo-rim was about to walk out, she finally mustered up the courage and asked him to sleep with her in her room that night. He agreed, but when they did that night, they slept on opposite sides, leaving a ton of space between them. Seo-rim broke the silence and told Young-bok that he felt lucky to have her. He said he didn't want to leave her with painful memories, and holding her hand, he told her that once Sachiko's baby was born, she had to learn to ride a bike. He said it was super important because one day they would need a vehicle. Young-bok simply nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. In her heart, it felt like Seo-rim's final goodbye. The next day, a piercing scream shattered the morning silence. Sachiko was in agony, and Young-bok knew right away it was time. Panicked, she got ready to help with the delivery. She rushed into the room to tell Seo-rim and found him sitting in his chair, completely still. She told him that she was going to get Kyung-ja and the other women in the village to help, and that he should stay right there with Sachiko. She thought he was just busy writing, but when she looked again, she realized he wasn't writing anything at all. He wasn't breathing. The man she had waited for 5 long years was dead.
In the hallway's cold and hollow gleam, a silent scream, a shattered dream. Books and fists, their laughter stings, a fragile heart bound by their strings. At home the echoes louder still, a crueler world that breaks the will. Family faces etched with pain, in shadows deep the tears remain. But even glass, when pressure grows, cuts sharper than the winter snows. In silent rage, a fire was born, a soul now twisted, bruised and torn.
Young-bok was absolutely devastated, and all the happiness she had felt the night before was replaced with unbearable pain. Both she and Sachiko were completely crushed by this tragic turn of events, their hearts heavy with regret over all the pointless fighting they had done. Later, Sachiko held her newborn baby in her arms, and she heard a noise from outside. She went to investigate and saw Youngbok burning the books that belonged to Seorim. She went back inside the room and found Youngbok in a state of sheer despair, trying to take her own life. Sachiko wrapped her arms around her and held on tight, begging her to stay and not give up. She promised that they would get through this together. And with that, the two women began to slowly heal. Sachiko started teaching Youngbok how to ride the bike that Seorim had mentioned. Youngbok was visibly terrified, but Sachiko just kept cheering her on, telling her a story about how she once crashed her bike back in Japan and was so embarrassed that she got fired. Youngbok was so engrossed in the story that she didn't even realize Sachiko had let go of the bicycle. She was riding all by herself. A few days later, the head seamstress was talking about how eerily quiet the border had been between North and South Korea. Just then, a deafening explosion ripped through the air. Youngbok knew right away that this was different, and a wave of anxiety washed over her, despite everyone thinking it was just the army's training. That night, Youngbok was woken up by an even louder blast. Both women looked at each other, assuming it was just military training, but then a blaring danger alarm went off. Youngbok ran to the window, and they both went outside where they saw villagers running for their lives. They followed the other villagers and took shelter in a shed. In the chaos, Youngbok took the hairpin she had taken from Sachiko and gave it back to her. They held on to each other, and Youngbok said that they had gotten through so much already and would get through this together. But the scene changed in an instant. A group of soldiers stormed through, looking for enemies who might be hiding in the area. Sachiko's baby started crying, and the sound instantly drew the commander's attention when he heard Sachiko speaking in Japanese. He thought she was the enemy. When the commander dragged Sachiko and her baby, Youngbok acted, taking a glass bottle and hitting the commander in the head. Youngbok and Sachiko took off into the forest, with the soldiers hot on their heels. Gunshots ripped through the trees, narrowly missing them. As they were running, Youngbok told Sachiko that she needed to go. She said Sachiko had to take the baby and run while she distracted the soldiers. Sachiko refused, saying she wouldn't leave her behind. Youngbok told her that if she didn't listen, they would all die, including the baby. She reminded Sachiko about the tree with the threads. That was their meeting point, but if she didn't show up by sunset, Sachiko had to go back to Japan with her baby. As her final goodbye, Youngbok called her older sister before running back toward the sound of the soldiers, a selfless act to save the remaining two people she loved most. Youngbok successfully drew all the soldiers' attention to her. She was surrounded. They had their weapons aimed at her, not because she was Japanese, but because she was a brave woman who had dared to protect a Japanese person. In a single moment, it was all over.
It tolls for them, a reckoning, a bitter end. From ashes rise, a haunting flame, to carve the scars, to stake the claim. No mercy found, no peace to seek. The silent heart now screams, now speaks.
Sachiko and her baby waited until the sun set, and she knew for sure it was the end for Youngbok. She couldn't hold back her tears as she realized she had lost Youngbok. Years later, an old Sachiko stood alone. She was with her adult daughter, who was also named Youngbok. Her daughter asked her why she was daydreaming and if she was thinking about her father. But Sachiko wasn't thinking about her husband. She was thinking about Youngbok. She had never told her daughter about her first friend. The memory was so real, as if the young Youngbok was standing right there in front of her. Sachiko smiled and held the beautiful charm necklace that Youngbok had given her so long ago, a reminder that the memory of her beautiful friend was still very much alive in her heart.